If a waitress can read the line your lawyers missed, maybe the most expensive thing in the room isn't the contract, it's your ego. The private dining room at Halston and Reed glowed like money. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished walnut walls, and the skyline of Midtown Manhattan shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like a promise only a few people in the city could afford to keep. At the center of it all sat Ethan Caldwell, 38, sharp-jawed, perfectly composed, the kind of man who made a $6,000 suit look like a uniform instead of a statement. His silver watch flashed once as he lifted his glass, glanced at the final contract, and offered the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. Around him, investors leaned in. Lawyers nodded. The European delegation across the table looked relaxed, too relaxed, maybe, but no one in the room seemed bothered by that. No one except the woman carrying a tray of espresso cups. Claire Whitmore moved quietly, almost invisibly, through the edges of the room in a pressed black uniform and a white apron tied neatly at her waist. Her blonde hair was pinned back in a simple twist. No jewelry except a tiny pair of pearl studs. No perfume strong enough to announce her before she arrived. Just a folded receipt book in one pocket, a blue pen in the other, and the kind of posture that made even a service uniform look dignified. She set a demitasse beside Ethan's right hand with a steadiness that would have impressed a surgeon. He barely looked at her. "Careful," he said, his voice smooth and amused as he tapped the contract with one finger. "If the waitress starts reading legal documents now, we're all doomed." The room laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, at least not on the surface. But it was enough. Enough for a few men to smirk into their bourbon. Enough for one of the younger associates to glance at Claire with instant embarrassment. Enough to remind everyone exactly where they believed she belonged. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She didn't lower her eyes. She simply placed the last espresso in front of the final guest, then let her gaze drift, just for a second, to the open page in front of Ethan. Page 14. A small annex attachment clipped behind the signature block. Thin paper. Slightly different weight than the rest. A font half a size smaller. And one sentence buried in the lower third that didn't belong where it was pretending to belong. Her fingers tightened once around the silver tray. Then she spoke in a voice so calm it almost disappeared beneath the soft jazz from the ceiling speakers. "You might be," she said. The laughter faded. Ethan looked up, mildly annoyed. "Excuse me." Claire's blue eyes rested on the contract, not on him. "If you sign page 14, she said, "you're not protecting your firm. You're giving them leverage after quarter two." Silence arrived so quickly it felt physical. One of the attorneys blinked. The lead investor on Ethan's left slowly lowered his glass. Across the table, a man from the delegation stopped smiling. Ethan stared at her as if he'd just noticed, for the first time, that the woman in front of him was not where he expected her to be. Claire finally met his gaze, her expression unreadable, almost gentle. "And if I were you, Mr. Caldwell," she said softly, "I'd read the hidden clause before anyone asks for your signature." For 3 full seconds, no one moved. The city lights beyond the glass still glittered. The jazz still played. Somewhere in the dining room outside, silverware chimed softly against china. But inside the private room, all the confidence that had filled the table a moment earlier seemed to collapse into a silence no one could explain away. Ethan Caldwell did not look at his investors. He did not look at the delegation across from him. He looked only at Claire Whitmore, standing with a silver tray balanced against one hip, as if she had not just interrupted a 9-figure acquisition with the calmest sentence in the room. Then his expression hardened. "What exactly?" he said, each word measured. "Do you think you were talking about?" Claire did not answer immediately. She lowered the tray onto the sideboard beside the wine station, folded her hands in front of her apron, and stepped just close enough to the table to see the page clearly without touching it. Her voice remained quiet, but now every person in the room leaned toward it. "Section 14, subsection C," she said. "The wording appears to delay control transfer protections until the end of year 2. But it does not. It ties those protections to fiscal review language triggered after the second quarter if performance benchmarks are not met under their revised standard." One of Ethan's attorneys gave a short, dismissive laugh that sounded forced even to himself. That is not possible. Claire turned her head slightly toward him. It is, if you read the cross-reference in the annex instead of the summary line above it. The attorney reached for the packet. Another lawyer beside him leaned over his shoulder. Pages turned. Faster than they should have. Ethan's jaw tightened. Across the table, Victor Laurent, the lead representative from the European firm, sat very still with both hands folded, his expression polished and unreadable. Too polished. Too unreadable. Claire noticed that before anyone else did. She noticed everything. Ethan looked down at page 14 again, then back at her. And how, he asked, his tone colder now, would a waitress know how to interpret cross-reference control language in a private equity contract? There it was. The question behind the question. Not what did she see? Who did she think she was? Claire met his gaze without flinching. Because commas matter, she said. And because the phrase subject to performance review is doing more work here than the room thinks it is. A faint shift passed through the delegation. Not panic. Not yet. But discomfort. The younger associate at Ethan's side noticed it too, and for the first time all evening, he stopped pretending this was just an awkward interruption. Then the lead attorney froze. His eyes dropped to the lower half of the page, then snapped to the annex behind it. He turned one sheet, then another. The color drained from his face so fast, it was almost startling. Ethan, he said, no longer trying to sound calm. Do not sign this. The words landed like a crack through glass. One investor cursed under his breath. Another leaned back as if the leather chair had suddenly become too small. Ethan took the contract from his attorney and read the line himself. Once. Twice. The room watched the exact moment he found it. The tiny shift in his eyes. The disappearance of that polished, superior calm. The sentence was there, buried beneath elegant formatting and legal smoke. If the revised quarterly benchmark was not met under the counterparty's valuation standard, voting protections shifted temporarily during review. Temporarily. 90 days. Long enough to corner a board. Long enough to force leverage. Long enough to make a man like Ethan Caldwell look careless in front of everyone who had ever trusted him not to be. Claire spoke again, and somehow that made it worse. It is not just the timing, she said. It is intent. Ethan looked up sharply. She nodded toward the annex page. That page was added later. The paper stock is lighter. The font is smaller by half a point, and the initials on the bottom corner are aligned differently than the rest of the packet. The room turned toward Victor Laurent. This time he smiled, but it was the wrong kind of smile. Thin, patient, like a man waiting to see how much damage could be denied before it had to be admitted. Ethan set the contract down very carefully, like something fragile or dangerous. Then he looked at Claire again. Not at her apron, not at the tray, not at the roll he had assigned her 5 minutes ago. At her. And for the first time that night, he did not look like the most powerful person in the room. Ethan Caldwell had built an empire on two instincts: spot weakness fast, and never let a room see you hesitate. But now the contract sat open in front of him like a trap with his own signature waiting at the bottom, and every eye in the room had shifted from the deal to the woman in the black apron standing beside the wine station. He did not like that feeling. He liked it even less because she had earned it. This meeting is paused, he said at last, his voice low and controlled, though the steel in it had changed. It was no longer the polished confidence of a man closing a deal. It was the restraint of a man realizing how close he had come to losing one. He turned to his legal team. I want every page reviewed. Every attachment. Every cross-reference. Now. Chairs moved. Papers slid. Phones appeared under the table and disappeared again when Ethan's expression made it clear no one was to call anyone yet. Across from him, Victor Laurent slowly adjusted his cuff links and offered a diplomatic smile. Surely this is a misunderstanding, he said in a lightly accented voice. An unfortunate delay caused by enthusiasm. The word hung in the air, smooth and insulting. Claire did not react, but Ethan did. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Victor the way a man looks at a chessboard after realizing the opening was never friendly. If it is a misunderstanding, Ethan said, then you will not mind waiting while we clarify it. Victor spread his hands as if generosity itself had taken human form. Of course, but his left thumb tapped once against the table. Tiny, fast, nervous. Claire noticed that too. Ethan's lead attorney, Martin Reeves, flipped through the annex pages again, this time slower, his face growing tighter with every line. There is more, he said. That got everyone's attention. Martin swallowed. The valuation benchmark is not just revised. It is internally defined by their advisory panel, not an independent third party. If the quarterly review triggers, they can effectively manufacture a temporary underperformance event. One of the investors stared. You are telling me they can lower the standard and trigger the transfer themselves? For 90 days, Martin said grimly. Yes. Silence again. Different this time. Heavier. Not shock now. Calculation. Anger. Ethan's fingers rested beside his untouched espresso. The cup had gone cold. He did not seem to notice. He looked at Claire, then at Martin, then back at the contract. How many people missed this? He asked. No one answered. No one needed to. Martin's face said enough. So did the junior associate, suddenly studying the tablecloth like it might offer legal advice. Ethan stood, slow and deliberate, the kind of movement that made everyone else sit straighter without meaning to. Mr. Laurent, he said, my team and I will need 10 minutes. Victor remained seated. Naturally. But as Ethan gathered the packet, Claire spoke again. Do not leave page 14 behind. The room turned to her, as if she had rung a bell. Ethan paused. Why? Claire's eyes flicked to the duplicate folder near Victor's right elbow. Because the replacement page is in your sign stack. But the original draft is probably still in his. No one breathed. Ethan looked at Victor. For the first time that evening, the European executive's smile faltered. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Ethan stepped around the table, not hurried, not dramatic, just precise.